Picture this. You are standing in the middle of one of the most hostile stretches of land on the entire planet. The sky above you is white with heat. The ground beneath your boots is cracked, red, and bone dry. There is not a single tree in sight. There is no grass, no river, no shade. The air itself seems to shimmer and twist like something alive, distorting the horizon into a wavering mirage. You look around and see what appears to be an ordinary, if eerily quiet, desert town. A few dirt roads, some low-lying buildings, mounds of excavated earth dotting the landscape like the burrowed hills of some enormous creature. And then, suddenly, you notice something strange. Chimneys rising up from the ground. Not from buildings, from the earth itself. Doors carved directly into hillsides. Signs pointing downward. Steps leading not into basements, but into entire homes, churches, hotels, and shops, all buried beneath the desert floor. What you are looking at is not a ghost town. It is one of the most extraordinary communities on Earth. Welcome to Coober Pedy, Australia's underground city, where thousands of people have chosen to live their entire lives beneath the surface of one of the driest deserts in the world. Coober Pedy is a town located in northern South Australia, roughly 846 kilometers north of Adelaide along the Stuart Highway, sitting almost exactly halfway between Adelaide and Alice Springs. To reach it by road from Australia's nearest major city takes a full 9 hours of driving through one of the most remote and unforgiving stretches of outback terrain on the continent. The landscape shifts gradually as you travel north, from gently rolling farmland to red-soiled plains that grow increasingly bare, increasingly vast, and increasingly indifferent to human presence. By the time you finally arrive at Coober Pedy, the world around you has taken on a quality that many visitors describe as lunar, otherworldly, stripped of color except for the deep ochre of ancient stone and the bleached white of the sky. The town sits on the erosional edge of the Stuart Ranges, perched on beds of sandstone and siltstone that plunge some 30 meters deep, all of it topped with a stony, treeless desert where very little plant life exists. What little rainfall falls on this land, and it is very little indeed, evaporates almost immediately. The earth does not hold water here. It does not hold life easily. And yet, against all reasonable expectation, it holds an entire community. To understand why people here live underground, you first have to understand what the climate above ground actually feels like. In the remote South Australian desert surrounding Coober Pedy, temperatures are known to reach as high as 125 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade. That is 51 degrees Celsius. On days like that, the air itself becomes dangerous. In the sweltering Australian summers, birds have been known to fall from the sky. This is not a figure of speech. The heat is so intense, so sustained and relentless during the summer months that wildlife simply cannot endure it. For humans, life above ground during those months requires constant, expensive, energy-hungry air conditioning, and even then, it is an uphill battle against an environment that seems determined to push people out. Average maximum temperatures in January hover around 36.7 degrees Celsius, while extreme highs have reached 48.3 degrees, recorded as recently as December 2019 and January 2026. The humidity is almost non-existent. The skies are typically cloudless, and the sun beats down on the red earth without mercy for the better part of the year. It is under these brutal conditions that the residents of Coober Pedy made a decision that, once you understand the heat, seems not eccentric at all, but entirely logical. They went underground. The story of Coober Pedy does not begin with a planner or an architect, or even a government scheme. It begins with a 14-year-old boy and a lucky stumble in the dirt. In early 1915, the new Colorado prospecting syndicate, made up of Jim Hutchison, his 14-year-old son William, and two associates, had been prospecting for gold just south of what would become a Coober Pedy. On the 1st of February, as the men went searching for water, young William stumbled upon several pieces of opal simply lying on the surface of the ground. That single discovery set in motion a chain of events that would transform a scorched and lifeless stretch of desert into one of the most unusual settlements in human history. Word spread quickly, as it always does when there is treasure involved. Prospectors flooded in from across Australia and eventually from around the world, each one dreaming of finding the glittering gemstones hidden in the ancient rock. The region's geological origins date back over 150 million years, when an inland sea left behind silica deposits that later formed opal, making Coober Pedy not just a mining town, but a place built on the bones of a vanished ocean. From that first accidental discovery, an entire world would eventually grow, not upward into the sky, but downward into the earth. The earliest settlers who arrived chasing opal fortunes were tough, resourceful, and desperate. They came with tents and timber and the stubborn optimism of people who had nothing to lose. They tried at first to build lives above the ground the way they always had, constructing simple shelters from whatever materials they could find or haul across the desert. But the heat defeated them, season after season. The early opal miners had initially built their residences above the ground, trying to adapt to the harsh climate, which was extremely hot in the day and very cold at night. Soon, however, they were struck by the inspiration to live underground in caves bored into the hillsides, known as dugouts, where the temperature would be constant and neither too hot nor too cold. Some of the very first people to dig those caves were returned soldiers from World War I, men who had spent years living in trenches and underground bunkers on the battlefields of Europe. For them, carving a home from the earth was not a foreign or frightening idea. It was something they already knew how to do. The early days, by all accounts, were like the Wild West. People who found opal were said to have slept next to their finds with guns to ward off would-be thieves. The underground in those early years was both shelter and sanctuary, a place carved out of chaos by hands that had already survived the worst the world had to offer. When most people hear the word cave, they picture something cold, dark, and primitive, a rough hollow in the rock with nothing but stone walls and the sound of dripping water. The dugout homes of Coober Pedy are nothing like that. Walk through the door carved into one of those hillsides, and you enter a world that is remarkably, almost deceptively comfortable. The cave dwellers of Coober Pedy enjoy a constant cool temperature of around 74 degrees Fahrenheit in their homes, making life underground the standard for desert comfort. Residents carve what they need from the sandstone, which boasts bookshelves, tables, and even underground swimming pools. The walls are smooth, painted in warm colors, and hung with photographs and artwork, just like any ordinary home. There are kitchens, bathrooms, lounge rooms, and multiple bedrooms. Some dugouts are modest, carved by hand by their owners over years of slow, careful expansion. Others are sprawling, multi-room residences with vaulted ceilings and polished stone floors that feel more like luxury properties than anything you might expect to find buried in a desert. An average cave home at 8 to 22 feet below ground level with modern amenities, several bedrooms, a living area, kitchen, and bathroom can be excavated out of the rock for roughly the same price as building a house above the surface, minus the air conditioning bills. That last detail is not a small thing. In a desert where air conditioning is the difference between survival and serious danger, the underground home pays for itself very quickly. There is elegant science behind what the people of Coober Pedy discovered through sheer practical necessity. The earth, when you go deep enough, becomes a natural insulator, a buffer against the wild temperature swings of the surface world. The extreme desert climate, with summer temperatures regularly exceeding 40 degrees Celsius, led early miners to dig underground homes called dugouts, where temperatures remain a comfortable 22 to 24 degrees Celsius year-round. That means that whether it is the middle of January and scorching on the surface, or the middle of July and surprisingly cold at night, the inside of a dugout home holds steady. There are no heating bills in winter, there are no cooling bills in summer. Dugouts must be excavated to a depth of at least 4 meters to avoid collapse. At that depth, under layers of sandstone and siltstone, the temperature remains steady, around 23 degrees Celsius, regardless of season. This is, in effect, a naturally occurring climate control system, one that requires no electricity, produces no emissions, and never breaks down. In an era when the world is increasingly concerned about energy consumption and the carbon cost of keeping buildings cool, the underground homes of Coober Pedy offer something that architects and climate scientists are beginning to study with genuine interest: a model of passive, sustainable shelter that was perfected not in a laboratory, but in a desert, by miners with pickaxes and determination. Coober Pedy is not simply a strange place to live. It is one of the most culturally diverse communities in all of Australia, a fact that surprises many visitors who expect to find a small, insular desert outpost. The town grew as miners from over 45 nationalities came seeking their fortune, creating a multicultural community unlike anywhere else in Australia. Umanopal mine Greeks, Serbians, Croatians, Italians, Lebanese, Afghans, British, and dozens of other nationalities arrived across the decades, each group bringing their languages, their food, their traditions, and their faith with them into the earth. Almost 60% of the inhabitants are of European origin. Walking through Coober Pedy's tunnels and dugout streets, you can hear multiple languages spoken in a single afternoon. The restaurants serve cuisine from across the Mediterranean. The shops carry goods that reflect a dozen different cultural traditions, and the spiritual life of the community is just as diverse, with multiple churches, faith communities, and cultural associations all carved into the same sandstone hillsides, separated not by national borders or city neighborhoods, but by a few meters of ancient rock. This extraordinary cultural richness grew not from prosperity or planning, but from shared hardship, from the unifying force of an environment so extreme that it stripped away the ordinary divisions of class and background and replaced them with a simple, powerful commonality. Everyone down here was looking for something, and everyone down here had survived. Perhaps the most astonishing expression of Coober Pedy's character is not its homes or its hotels, but its churches, because even the sacred spaces here have gone underground, and the results are breathtaking. The first purpose-built underground Catholic church of its kind in the world opened on June 25, 1967, with extensions completed in September 1984. It stands as a landmark not just for the town, but for architectural history, a house of worship excavated from solid rock, lit by carefully placed lights that cast a warm glow across stone walls carved with quiet reverence. Then there is the Serbian Orthodox Church of Saint Elijah the Prophet, which may be the most remarkable religious building on earth. The church was built by Serbian opal miners who settled in Coober Pedy, who astonishingly constructed a place of worship 30 meters long, 5.3 meters wide, and 7 meters high, with the floor reaching 17 meters below ground level at its deepest point. Despite the church being entirely without windows, light behind stained glass icons gloriously shines through, elegantly interweaving a sea of rainbow hues. A sand candelabrum and altar are adorned behind a large gallery of saints, while the interior walls are engraved with bas-relief carved sculptures. These are not simple, functional spaces. They are places of extraordinary beauty. places where human artistry and spiritual longing have been given physical form, not by reaching toward the sky, as most churches do, but by descending deep into the earth. They represent something profound about the people of Coober Pedy, that no matter how harsh the world above them became, they never stopped reaching for something higher. Life in Coober Pedy follows rhythms that are at once deeply ordinary and utterly unlike anything found anywhere else in the world. Children go to school. Adults go to work. People do their shopping, visit their friends, and go home to dinner. But all of it, the texture of daily existence, is shaped by the peculiar reality of living in a remote desert town where the sun is an adversary as much as it is a source of light. Despite its remote location, Coober Pedy functions like any small Australian town, with schools, shops, cafes, and services. However, daily routines are shaped by isolation and environment. Supplies often travel long distances, water is scarce, and residents rely heavily on solar power. The town's water supply is drawn from the Great Artesian Basin, one of the largest underground freshwater reservoirs in the world, which adds yet another layer of irony to a place already rich in it. The people live underground, draw their water from underground, and mine their gemstones from underground. The pace of life is slower, more self-sufficient, and closely tied to the land. For many who choose to live there, Coober Pedy represents freedom from city congestion, housing pressures, and constant noise. At night, the desert sky comes alive with stars, unspoiled by light pollution, a reminder of just how far this town is from Australia's major cities. And that distance for most residents is not a hardship. It is a choice. A deliberate turning away from the frantic, crowded rhythms of modern urban life in favor of something quieter, harder, and in its own particular way, deeply beautiful.
Everything in Coober Pedy, every dugout, every church, every road, every story, exists because of one thing: opal. This extraordinary gemstone, formed over millions of years from silica-rich water seeping through ancient rock, is found in greater abundance here than anywhere else on Earth, with an estimated 70% of the world's opal being mined in Coober Pedy. The industry, along with tourism, still sustains the town. Opals are not like diamonds or gold. They do not occur in predictable geological formations that can be mapped and drilled with industrial precision. They hide. They appear in pockets and veins and unexpected crevices, and finding them is as much about luck and instinct as it is about science. The practice of opal mining is a matter of exclusively private individuals. Companies are not interested because it is a huge effort, and there is a relatively small chance of finding anything and making a profit. This means that opal mining in Coober Pedy remains, to this day, a deeply personal pursuit, a game played between individual human beings and the earth, with enormous rewards for the few and long years of patient searching for the many. The region's geology dates back 150 million years to when the town was the bed of a vast ocean. The push and pull of the tide carried minerals from the sandstone seabed deep into cracks in the earth, leaving behind silica deposits that gradually hardened into opals. Every stone found here is a piece of a vanished sea, a fragment of deep time carried up from the dark by a human hand.
The history of opal mining in Coober Pedy is not a quiet or orderly one. It is a story of booms and busts, of fortunes made overnight and lost just as quickly, of communities built on hope and sometimes torn apart by greed. In the decades following that first discovery in 1915, the town grew and changed with each new wave of prospectors. After the Second World War, the pace of development accelerated dramatically. New mechanical tools allowed miners to dig faster and deeper than ever before. It was the beginning of mechanization on the field after the World Wars, which persisted to the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, establishing Coober Pedy as a modern town native to a multi-million-dollar opal mining industry. By the height of the opal boom, the landscape around the town had been transformed into a surreal pockmarked moonscape of excavation mounds and open shafts. By 1999, There were more than 250,000 mine shaft entrances in the area, a particular hazard for both residents and tourists. Signs throughout the town warn visitors to watch where they step, because the ground is honeycombed with shafts that drop without warning into the dark. There might be millionaires living in Coober Pedy, but it is kept strictly secret. Making it public would mean that a lot of mining claims would be bought around the spot where the opal was found. The culture of secrecy around opal discovery is an old and deeply ingrained one. In a town built on fortune, the location of a good find is the most valuable thing a person can possess. One of the most quietly remarkable aspects of life in Coober Pedy is the relationship between mining and housing, because in this town, the two activities are essentially the same. When a resident wants more space, they simply dig. When a family grows, another room is excavated. When someone wants a library or a studio or a wine cellar, they pick up tools and carve out the sandstone that surround them. Many miners avoid restrictions on residential mining by expanding their homes. This can be considered a further communal practice, which shows exactly how tightly resource and dwelling are interconnected. The sandstone that makes up Coober Pedy's underground world is soft enough to carve with relatively simple tools, yet solid enough to hold its shape reliably, making it an ideal building material that also happens to be free, abundantly available, and already in exactly the right place. Some residents have expanded their dugouts over decades into truly impressive subterranean estates. Multiple levels, connecting tunnels, rooms opening off rooms in a labyrinth of personal space that grows a little larger every time someone picks up a drill. The network of tunnels grows with each passing year. It is as if the town itself is a living thing, slowly, continuously expanding downward, always pushing deeper into the ancient rock, always making a little more room for the people who have chosen to call home. Coober Pedy began drawing visitors from outside the region in earnest during the 1980s, when the sealing of the Stewart Highway made the journey significantly more accessible. Since then, the flow of tourists has grown into a significant part of the town's economy, second only to opal mining itself. What visitors find when they arrive is almost always different from what they expected, and almost always more surprising. Descend beneath the ground and discover a labyrinth of underground houses, hotels, and even shops. Fall asleep tucked beneath the Earth's surface in one of the town's famous dugouts. Watch the iconic Outback town change color with famous Outback sunsets, or faucet for your own opals. For those who stay the night in one of the underground hotels, the experience is genuinely unlike anything available anywhere else in the world. The rooms are carved from the same sandstone as the private homes. The darkness inside is absolute when the lights are off. No windows, no ambient glow from passing cars or streetlights. Just total, enveloping blackness and silence, so deep it has a texture of its own. Once visitors are down in the converted mines, they find it is actually quite homey. There is something primal and comforting about it. Something that reaches past all the noise of the modern world and connects with a part of the human psyche that is very old, very quiet, and very much at peace. Guests who arrive skeptical often leave converted. The underground, it turns out, is not frightening. It is restful. It is not an accident that filmmakers looking for landscapes that feel post-apocalyptic, alien, or simply beyond the boundaries of the ordinary world have repeatedly turned to Coober Pedy. The town and its surroundings have an atmosphere that is genuinely difficult to find anywhere else on Earth, a quality of stark, stripped-back reality that makes everything feel both intensely immediate and slightly unreal. Coober Pedy's post-apocalyptic desert landscape has attracted filmmakers. Visitors can spot famous locales from Mad Max and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. Scenes from the dystopian action film Pitch Black were also filmed here, and it is easy to see why. The crater-like fields of excavation mounds, the dust-colored structures half swallowed by the earth, the eerie chimneys rising from the ground with no buildings attached. It all looks like the remnants of some civilization that ended badly and was slowly being reclaimed by the planet. On an end note, the grassless golf course at Coober Pedy offers night games where players use glow-in-the-dark golf balls and carry a small piece of turf to use for teeing off. This detail captures something essential about the spirit of the place. Its people have not simply endured a harsh environment. They have found ways to laugh at it, play in it, and make it their own, with a deadpan humor and practical creativity that is distinctly, unmistakably Australian. Before the opal, before the miners, before the dugouts and the churches and the underground hotels. This land belonged to people who had lived here for tens of thousands of years and understood it in ways that the prospectors who arrived in 1915 could barely imagine. Aboriginal people have a long-standing connection with this area, which is considered by the people of the Western Desert to be the traditional lands of the Arabana people, although Kokatha and Yankunytjatjara people are also closely attached to some ceremonial sites in the area. These communities were the original custodians of a landscape that most outsiders still regard as nothing but hostile emptiness. People who knew every rock formation, every seasonal waterway, every plant and animal and sacred site across hundreds of kilometers of desert. When opal was discovered and settlers moved in to begin mining operations, they brought with them diseases such as influenza, tuberculosis, and measles, which the indigenous people had no immunity to, and many of them died. It is a story repeated across Australia and across the world wherever colonial settlement collided with indigenous communities, a story of displacement and loss that sits beneath the more colorful narratives of opal booms and underground architecture. Today, between 300 and 500 of the residents of Coober Pedy are indigenous, and in 1975, the local Aboriginal community formally adopted the name of Muna, meaning long life, for their community, a name that has since been given to several local institutions and stands as a quiet assertion of a presence that has never really left. Ask the long-term residents of Coober Pedy why they stay, and you will hear answers that are remarkably consistent despite coming from people of wildly different backgrounds, ages, and nationalities. They stay because of the freedom. They stay because of the sky at night, a sky so vast and unpolluted by artificial light that the Milky Way appears as a solid band of silver overhead, so bright it casts faint shadows. They stay because of the community, a community formed not by shared ethnicity or shared history, but by shared experience of a place that demands something from everyone who lives there. Jenny Goff, who has lived in the town since 1961 and found opals worth significant sums while digging her underground home, says she would never leave. Stories like hers are not unusual. For people who have spent decades in Coober Pedy, the idea of returning to the noise and density of the city has become genuinely unappealing. The boom was followed by a leveling off, and today, with fewer miners in the field and fewer young people committing to the financial uncertainty and physical hardships of this way of life, the industry is declining. The population has fluctuated over the years, and the town has faced real challenges in recent decades, particularly in attracting younger generations and sustaining economic vitality beyond the opal market. But those who remain speak of their underground home with an affection and a certainty that no amount of hardship has managed to erode. For them, the earth is not a place of darkness. It is the most familiar, most welcoming place they know. Here is a question that climate scientists and urban planners are beginning to ask with increasing seriousness. What if the people of Coober Pedy are not simply an eccentricity, but a preview? What if their underground lifestyle, born a necessity in the mid-20th century Australian desert, is actually a glimpse of how more and more people might need to live as global temperatures continue to rise? Living underground could be an option for more people as global temperatures rise. The natural insulation provided by several meters of earth is not just comfortable, it is radically energy efficient. Coober Pedy's underground living naturally insulates homes, reducing the need for artificial cooling. The town also harnesses solar power for energy, making a unique example of adapting to extreme environments. The hybrid solar power system that now supplies electricity to this off-grid community is itself a remarkable achievement. A town so far from the national grid that it built its own and now runs it largely on sunlight. In a world grappling with the twin crises of rising heat and rising energy costs, Coober Pedy offers a genuinely compelling countermodel. A community that has already solved, through centuries of practice and decades of refinement, exactly the problems that the rest of the world is only beginning to face. The underground, for the people of Coober Pedy, is not a retreat from modern life. It may, in fact, be the direction that modern life is heading. There's a kind of beauty to Coober Pedy that is not immediately obvious, and that becomes more visible the longer you spend there. It is not the beauty of sweeping green landscapes or glittering coastlines. It is stranger, quieter, and harder to describe. Coober Pedy doesn't feel like a typical travel destination. It feels experimental, resilient, and deeply human. A place where necessity has shaped architecture, lifestyle, and community in ways few other towns can claim. Stand at the surface at sunset, and the excavation mounds that litter the landscape are transformed by the falling light. Turn from pale dust to deep amber and burning orange, the shadows between them long and dramatic, the whole scene looking like something from a dream or a painting. Visitors come to sleep in dugout hotels, to faucet for opals, to watch the desert change color at dusk. Go underground, and there is a different beauty, the cool silence of stone, the faint smell of ancient earth, the slightly dreamlike quality of moving through rooms carved by hand from rock that was once the floor of a prehistoric ocean. The opals themselves carry a beauty that has captivated human beings for millennia. Stones that contain entire spectrums of color within a single gem, shifting and changing as the light moves across them, as if something alive were trapped inside the rock. Coober Pedy is a place where beauty and harshness are so completely intertwined that they become impossible to separate, where the same qualities that make life difficult are the ones that make it extraordinary. Every great human settlement is, at its core, a story about adaptation, about the remarkable, stubborn, often surprising ways that human beings respond to the world they find themselves in. Coober Pedy is one of the purest expressions of that story that exists anywhere on Earth. It is a place where people looked at an environment that seemed designed to drive them away, and decided instead to go deeper in, where miners who came looking for gemstones discovered, along the way, that the Earth itself was the greatest find, a steady, reliable, sheltering home carved from one 50-million-year-old rock, where communities from dozens of countries and cultures descended into the same hillsides and built something together that none of them could have built alone. Today, Coober Pedy is home to around 3,500 residents, most of whom live in subterranean dugouts, as well as flocks of tourists who travel over 8 hours from the nearest city to visit this opal capital of the world. It is a town that has survived booms and busts, population shifts and economic uncertainty, and it endures. Quieter now than in its wildest years, but still alive, still digging, still finding. Coober Pedy today relies as much on tourism as the opal mining industry to provide the community with employment and sustainability, and it has found ways to tell its own story to the world that come looking. Because the story of Coober Pedy is ultimately not just about opals or underground homes or desert survival. It is about what human beings are willing to do for belonging, what we are willing to build, and how deep we are willing to go to find a place we can call home. And beneath the burning Australian desert, a few thousand people have already found it. They're living there right now, cool, quiet, and rooted in the earth, while the sun rages uselessly above them.